Yorker piece, of course, the one that got a lot of press, Rex Tillerson, it also kind of telegraphed that this was coming. It talked about this meeting of diplomats back in September and how he just had a list of grievances against Iran. And then Iran's foreign minister was like, wait a minute, we have our own grievances, and kind of talked about how they couldn't even open up a bank account in the UK, that you guys are supposed to lift all these sanctions. Okay. It seems like everybody's unhappy with this deal. Where do we go from here?
Yeah, you know, what's interesting is that President Donald Trump, as a businessman, should know that when you both sides walk away from a business deal a little uncomfortable, you know it's a pretty good deal, right? Now, what you know, the critics of the deal will point out there's all sorts of sunset clauses and provisions that allow Iran to sprint 6 years from now, 7 years from now towards a deal. Now, putting all of that aside, I mean, because you can criticize the deal, and by the way, there's hardliners in Iran who criticize the deal too. What President Trump also did, and as you pointed out from that New York article, those talks were also about a new Iran strategy. And what we saw today, issued from the White House, was a new Iran strategy. But that new Iran strategy was obscured by all the noise about whether President Trump actually decertified and jumped away from the deal or is actually still in the deal. But this new Iran strategy is actually very consequential, and it's something we should talk about.
And so what are some of the elements of it that you saw that jumped off the page?
Sure. You know, clearly, this is a strategy that is 180 degrees different than President Obama's strategy. What the Trump administration said is that they want to neutralize Iran's aggressive activities in the region, according to them. They want to confront the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC. They want to drain the financial sources of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. And hold on for a second on that, because the IRGC plays a very important role in Iran's economy, right? And if you say you want to drain the financial resources, what you're sending a signal to European companies. You're saying that European companies, you better not do business in Iran because we're going to sanction every single entity that the IRGC is involved in, right? And you can't do business in Iran without hitting the IRGC in some way, shape, or form. So, and finally, they said they want to confront Iran's ballistic missile activity. So the Iran-U.S. relationship was already fraught with risk and potential confrontation. This new Iran strategy ratcheted that up at least 4 or 5 levels.
One of the comments from Leon Panetta, who was a former cabinet member in the Obama administration today, is that presidents are remembered for the bridges that they build, not the ones they tear down. This president's all about tearing down bridges. Talk to me about that, and how do you mend this if that's the intent?
Yeah, you know, I'll tell you, look, there was a clear need for a review of Iran policy. But there's just so many contradictions in this policy that he's laid out. You know, on the one hand, he speaks to the Iranian people and he talks about their aspirations for freedom and democracy in that speech he gave today. On the other hand, he bans them from entering the United States, and they're part of this travel ban, right? You know, on the one hand, he talks about the importance of the Iranians achieving their economic prosperity and their economic dignity, right? He actually mentioned those kind of things in the speech. But the Iran nuclear deal will actually help them achieve that because it'll normalize Iran's relations with the outside world. So there's like many things in this Trump administration, this is a policy that is not terribly coherent and it's full of contradictions.
Well, Ashton, we're going to have to leave it.
Even though he certainly had it within his authority to do so. He kicked it to Congress, but he can say, and can say legitimately, that he's actually being much tougher on the Iranians than the Obama administration was prepared to do. Now, there may be consequences. You saw the Treasury Department has now leveled these sanctions directly against the Revolutionary Guard, a part of the Iranian government and armed forces, and the Iranians are likely to respond to that. This deal is a little bit brittle, and so it can fall apart through accidents, through escalation in the region, and also because hardliners in Iran aren't necessarily happy with it. But everyone wants the other side to be blamed for it. The Iranians want Trump to pull out unilaterally. Trump wants the Iranians to do something that forces other allies to get with Trump's harder line position. Right now, both sides are stepping up towards the precipice, but no one yet is blinking.
Listen to what Ben Rhodes, who was the Deputy National Security Counsel for Barack Obama, he tweeted this. It's hard to overstate how irresponsible it is for Trump to risk blowing up Iran deal by demanding rest of world justify his campaign rhetoric. What do you make of that?
Well, again, he hasn't blown up the deal. If you listen to what he's been saying and you watch his tweets, it might sound like he's going to blow up the deal. But time and time again, he says things like NATO is obsolete and the North Koreans will see fire and fury. And now we have, it's the worst ever deal. Ben Rhodes is used to this. Obama said Assad must go. Assad didn't go anywhere. Presidents say things. Trump says more than many, perhaps, but they don't necessarily reflect a policy. There's one thing that Trump is saying consistently, though, that I think needs some diving into, which is he continues to say, he said it today and he said it a few months ago when Tillerson recertified the deal. He said the Iranians are not living up to the spirit of the deal. And it's not clear what Trump believes the spirit of that deal is, because, of course, the deal didn't make America and Iran friends. It was a very narrow agreement around Iranian nuclear capabilities, and everyone in the world, the inspectors and the EU, the allies, the Russians, the Chinese, they're all saying, and Tillerson, that they're living up to this deal. What is that spirit? If you ask the Iranians, they would say they have a very different perspective, a Trump administration that says that Saudi Arabia is their best friend, as opposed to one that wanted under Obama a more balanced relationship to try to open up towards the Iranians. They'd probably say the Americans aren't living up to the spirit of the deal, but there wasn't much spirit. If you remember, this was a really hard deal between two countries that don't really like each other very much.
Well, let's talk about some of those other countries, because you're an expert in geopolitics. So if you are listening in the Middle East today, and you're not in Iran, and you're maybe Israel, you're Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, what do you think they took away from today's message?
I think they're happy with it. I think they've been warning the Trump administration from day one, don't you pull out. You want to talk tough, that's fine. Put more pressure on Iran, that's fine. Don't pull out. And I think that they see what Trump has done is a tactical climb down that also continues to keep pressure on Iran. The Iranians, have been sanctioned under the United Nations for ballistic missile testing activities that they continue to do. Yeah. The Americans sanctioned them. The Iranians and the Saudis want to push on that.
I was utterly disappointed. I was hoping that he would echo his own Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, who just last night met the reporters and told them that the U.S. intends to abide by the nuclear agreement. And we have also heard from the Defense Secretary Mattis that this deal is in the national interest of the United States. For Trump to completely ignore the opinion of these professional high officials of his own cabinet and make these outlandish, demonizing statements against Iran and this big stab at the nuclear agreement is really catering to the far-right elements of his base and appeasing, this troubled prime minister in Israel who's looking for scapegoats from his own troubled problems with the Palestinians and Arabs. And this really opens a Pandora's box with a very big cloud of uncertainty over the nuclear agreement that is strongly favored by the rest of the international community, including all the other signatories of the agreement. I have seen the joint statement by the Europeans and China and so forth. So the U.S. is really isolating itself, and it's really very, very unlikely that the U.S. Congress would take any unwise move to unravel this deal. And the most probable outcome from the U.S. Congress, in my opinion, is inaction.
And do you think that's likely?
Which is likely. I don't think that the U.S. Congress would be dumb enough to go and scrap a deal that is in the U.S.'s own national interest. And we have seen the blistering statement by the former negotiator, former Secretary John Kerry, saying that Trump has taken a very dangerous step and has created potentially the Iranian nuclear crisis, an unnecessary international crisis. And this is disservice to U.S. and its own national interest. And President Trump should think twice before taking this further and unraveling this deal altogether.
Well,
I hasten to add that I really don't think that Trump went that far to completely decertify. His refusal to recertify is not, strictly speaking, from a legal standpoint, tantamount to decertification.
Right. That's a really good point. But let's talk a little bit about Iran, because President Rouhani said today that the United States is more isolated than ever. And you mentioned it. I mean, he's got his own advisors who said that they're in compliance. You've got all of these other world leaders who are concerned about this. There were a lot of hardliners in Iran who basically suggested you can't trust the United States, while the moderates were pushing back, saying, let's go for this deal. What happens there now?
Well, unfortunately, this causes a political setback for the moderate President Rouhani and his nuclear team, led by the resourceful Foreign Minister Dr. Zarif. And, the hardliners see a historical deja vu. It reminds them of, right after 9/11, when Iran cooperated with the political changeover in Afghanistan, and George Bush rewarded them with axis of evil speech. Now they fully complied with this international agreement. There's not a shred of evidence that Iran is in non-compliance, and the tiny bit of evidence that Trump mentioned in his speech today, they were all corrected, and you have 8 reports by the IAEA confirming that Iran is in full compliance with its obligations under the JCPOA. So Iran is rightfully angry and upset, and they will take proportional response to this. We've heard from President Rouhani that Iran will remain within the terms of the agreement so long as the other parties are in good faith standing with it, and hopefully that will be the case for the foreseeable future.
Well, we'll definitely keep
out by the US, Russia, France, the UK, China, Germany, and Iran back in 2015. It followed 9 years of talks and a decade-long standoff, which many viewed at the time as one of the world's most pressing crises. Now, the international nuclear watchdog that's been monitoring Iran's compliance with the deal says Tehran is keeping up its side of the bargain. That includes, for example, shipping enriched uranium to Russia, mothballing thousands of centrifuges, and removing the core from a reactor at a key nuclear facility. Now, certain U.S. officials also back the view that Iran has been good to its word, while their European colleagues say, well, Trump is simply wrong.
Iran is in technical compliance of the agreement.
Iran is not in material breach of the agreement, and I do believe the agreement to date has delayed the development of a nuclear capability by Iran.
The signals we're getting from the United States are that the president will explain to the Senate that, in his view, the nuclear agreement with Iran is not being fulfilled. This is contrary to the view of the EU member states that were involved in the agreement. It also contradicts our view. We certainly do not want the nuclear agreement to be damaged.
We have an interest and the responsibility, a duty, to preserve the nuclear deal with Iran.
RT's Ilya Petrenko now taking a closer look at what could be Donald Trump's reasons to break this deal.
So, Donald Trump's got a problem with what's known as Iran's nuclear deal. Okay, he's not a fan of Iran in the first place. He's confident it's still a nest for terrorists. But is that a good enough reason to basically throw the compromise agreement that required so much diplomatic effort to the floor? I mean, when it comes to sticking to the deal terms, the world agrees. Tehran is behaving. So why the assumption the deal's in jeopardy because of Washington? The House Foreign Affairs Committee chairman explains.
The Tehran regime clearly sees itself as a movement, one that uses ideology and violence to destabilize its neighbors, to threaten others.
Just for the record, that was an American official talking about someone else, promoting ideology and views, using violence in other countries to get what they want. Isn't that a U.S. thing, like the golden rule of their foreign policy that we've seen in action so many times?
And we act to stand united with our allies for peace. By acting now, we are upholding our values, protecting our interests, and advancing the cause of peace.
This nation, in World War and in Cold War, has never permitted the brutal and lawless to set history's course. Now as before, we will secure our nation, protect our freedom, and help others to find freedom of their own.
My fellow Americans, for nearly 7 decades, the United States has been the anchor of global security. The burdens of leadership are often heavy, but the world's a better place because we have borne them.
What a historic background. Looks like Mr. Royce might as well replace the words Tehran regime with the names of American presidents. They were the ones who loved promoting ideology, i.e. democracy, elsewhere. Yeah, interventions are exactly what I'm talking about. Donald Trump is an unpredictable man. When it comes to Iran and the deal, maybe not so much. Anyway, we're just about to find out.
Political scientist Kaveh Afrasiabi believes the nuclear deal was always at risk because Donald Trump doesn't understand Iran as a country.
I really think that the notion that Iran is a cause or a movement and not a state is a very poor substitute for a concrete analysis of Iran and its external behavior. Unfortunately, the U.S. has not been pretty loyal to its own norms and values by supporting authoritarian dictatorial regimes that are foreign to ballot boxes, particularly in the Middle East and Persian Gulf region. So part of the problem with the U.S. is not that it's not just a regime and a movement, but a perverse notion of its own values when it comes to its interest in all regions, sacrificing democracy and human rights for the sake of its own national interests. So the problem stems from the U.S. that takes a page from its own history and attributes it to Iran, creates a convenient misperception in order to pursue hawkish Iranophobic policies against Iran.
Very hard to persuade our friends and partners in the US Congress that we think the deal has value, and there are many people in Congress who want to fix it, not nix it.
Right. And a lot of people want to get him a comb or a brush. That is Boris Johnson. Meanwhile, to further analyze the situation, let's bring in Ambassador John Bolton, former ambassador to the United Nations, and a big critic of this deal. I'm wondering, Ambassador, are you happy with what the president decided to do tonight?
Well, I think by announcing again how bad he thinks the deal is, he signaled pretty clearly that he expects he's going to get out of it in due course. My preference, and I've said this all along, is that we just ought to abrogate the deal and get out of it. He's adopted a two-stage approach, but I think there's a very important line in the speech that says that he reserves the power to get out of the deal at any moment. It's under continuous review. So he is making it clear that ultimately the decision is his. And I think we're headed in the right direction. I would have been happier resolving it today because I think clarity is important, but we're on the right path, I believe.
Ambassador, did you have a chance to talk to the president about this? Because I know he really respects your opinion.
I did yesterday, and I appreciate that opportunity, absolutely.
And
we had a great talk about it. That's all I'm going to say.
Really? Because I'll just sit here in silence until you talk. I'll wait you out. I got time. I'm telling you. All right.
You watch. He's look. I think he has demonstrated, beginning in the campaign and through his tenure to date, he understands the threat of nuclear proliferation from the likes of Iran and North Korea, and he's determined to prevent it on his watch. He's been left with some very unhappy options in both cases. And as I say, the beginning the process of ending this deal is a major step, a huge departure from Obama. And, you know, it doesn't look like the Hillary Clinton presidency either.
By the way, the one who's the biggest critic of this announcement in the speech today, even though we're not totally out of it yet, is John Kerry, who cut the deal. He says it's very, very poor non-strategic diplomacy. He said his voice was rising when he was speaking. He says you cannot unilaterally reset the terms of this deal. The minute we see the stockpile going up, the questions and red flags will go up like crazy. 15 or 25 years from now, you will still have the military options that you have today. So what's the rush is what he's saying. What's the rush, Ambassador?
You know, this deal doesn't mean a thing to the Iranians, and the very fact that we've gone through this negotiation shows they can't be trusted. People seem to have forgotten, starting with John Kerry, not to mention the Europeans, that Iran is a party to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, where they solemnly pledged never to seek or acquire nuclear weapons. They've been violating the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is the European Union foreign policy spokeswoman, Madame Mogherini, just said a moment ago, is a multilateral obligation. What do you need this deal for at all? If you believe that they'll adhere to their obligations, the fact is they won't. But even beyond that, to allow them, on the basis of their record, to have any uranium enrichment capability at all shows why this deal is inherently unworkable. And it was a surrender by the Europeans and a surrender by Kerry and Obama.
Ambassador, for 3 years, the President Obama tried not to upset the apple cart in the Middle East as Iran just ran through Iraq, ran over Syria, destroyed the uprising, reinvigorated with Hezbollah in order to keep this deal on track. A deal that we originally said, you got to renounce terrorism. They said no. We said, all right, we'll keep talking. Then we said, no more enrichment of uranium. They said, no, we're still going to do that. We kept talking. And that's why we're ending up with this deal, which not even 50 senators voted for. I laugh at the fact that people are actually acting like this is a good deal and this crazy billionaire from New York wants to get out of it. That's just not the facts.
Yeah, let's come back to the Europeans here, because everybody is wringing their hands that the Europeans will be upset with us. I remember very clearly during the Bush administration in 2003, these same European countries, Britain, France, and Germany, said, we want to negotiate with Iran. Our aim is to stop all uranium enrichment. In fact, they said, we won't even agree to negotiate with them unless they suspend all enrichment activity during the negotiations. And they systematically gave that position up. I didn't think it was a good idea to negotiate with Iran on this in 2003 because I didn't trust them then. We have been taken to the cleaners. What the president did today is the first step in reversing that, and it's an important step. Not as